What up, what up? Chad.
Good day, mate.
Chad, cow, grass.
G'day, mate. How's things?
Chad, you sounded just like just like Chris.
I've been in Australia for about a month, a little over a month, and so I've been picking up on the lingo.
What else
That's
do they
good.
say over there?
Huh?
So what else do they say over there that you've been picking up
They have
on?
this weird obsession, and I don't understand why, but the Australians have a weird obsession about shortening every word. Right? You can't just say breakfast. You have to say brekkie. You can't say McDonald's. You
Yeah.
have to say Macca's. You can't say afternoon. You can have to say like ave.
Arvo.
Like
Arvo.
ave, whatever they call it. Like just everything needs to be shortened for some fucking reason.
It's economy of effort.
I guess so.
Very efficient. I've never heard that afternoon one. I'm totally out of the loop on the afternoon thing.
The other funny.
Yeah, it's just like, I'll do it in the Arvo. It's just simple. I'll do it in the afternoon.
Gotcha. That one hasn't made it over here. Literally never heard it.
One of the other funny things I kind of realize is that they have a tendency to constantly tell each other that everything's okay. Like every time you go talk to somebody, it's like, just a minute, and then you always end it with like a no dramas, no worries, all good, mate, or like everything always has to be ended in some sort of like reaffirmation that everything's okay. Don't need to freak out.
Yeah. We're like, what's the worst that can happen? She'll be right. It's all good.
Should be all right.
It is a bit fast though. We always understate things as well. Generally.
Got bit by a spider. Should be alright.
When I was in America, I went to Subway and I was asking for capsicum. They're like, what the hell is a capsicum? Have you come across that? Like peppers?
No, that's it. That's the other very fascinating about Australia that I learned is that like the amount of biodiversity in Australia with foods, fruits, animals. Like there are animals out there that I went to go visit and I saw that like I've never even seen or ever heard about. And then there's just so much diversity in Australia. It's crazy.
Crazy. I just know there's like 10-inch spiders over there. So
Okay.
Yeah, they're definitely large spiders and
Yeah, you would have seen some large spiders and mosquitoes and everything else is large there. So it's
I
just
saw I think I saw like a 5 or 6 meter crocodile. And a crocodile is a scary thing because literally its bite force is not only the strongest bite force in the animal kingdom everywhere, like more than a great white, it's actually twice the bite force of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Like their jaws are incredibly fucking strong. You don't just it doesn't just crust you, it bursts your body. Do not get bitten by one of these
in
guys.
in Northern Australia, there was a big storm. And someone's house, like on the Esplanade, they had a pool in this house that was right by the water. After the storm, a crocodile was in the pool, in some person's pool. It's just nuts.
Yeah, it is a crazy species of animal. I went to go visit some, and this like crocodile, like kind of a handler guy, right? This like salt of the earth Aussie guy. Like he's been around them so much that he like puts his hand in the mouth of an actual crocodile because he knows how to handle it correctly. He'll like sit on the thing's back and just kind of chill. I'm just like, dude, that thing will wreck you. Get away from that fucking thing. It's crazy.
Yeah, how many fingers that guy got?
It's like, it's crazy. He's like, there's a specific part of the mouth you can put your finger on, and the croc will never shut its mouth when it shuts its mouth, it's like extraordinarily fast. It's like a lot of power. Like it actually makes a clapping sound. It's pretty incredible. But he's actually literally trying to raise the and break the Guinness Book of World Records of the largest crocodile ever. And so that's the one that he was kind of showboating, putting his finger in his mouth and sitting on his back and that kind of stuff.
It's nuts there. They used to get like 7 or 8 meters plus back in the day. But they were hunted extensively.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't, if you're not like if you're an American, like 7 or 8 meters is like almost the size of a school bus. Like it's a massive. It's like probably 2 or 3 car lengths. You know, it's incredibly large.
I'd rather a shark any day for a crocodile because sharks will bite you and have a nibble. Crocodiles they're out to get you. That's why they're so dangerous. That's why they're so fearful.
Yeah,
that's why they go swimming up north.
Yeah, I asked the guy, like, just out of curiosity, like, if you were ever bitten by a croc, like, what is the thing that you do? Like, do you like gouge the eyes, or like you scream, play dead? Like, what is the actual recommendation? And he's just like, I mean, if it gets you, it gets you. There's nothing you're gonna do at that point.
Fair enough.
You're just gonna be dead at that point. Like, you can, all right, go for the eyes if you'd like to. I mean, it doesn't hurt. You know, you're already, like, you know, but you're not getting out of it. You're dead. I'm just like, oh, okay, all right, okay. With bears, you play dead. With sharks, you gouge the eyes. But with crocs, you just fucked.
Yeah. So you get hit the nose hard enough, you might, but yeah, your chances are very, very slim.
Yeah, extremely slim.
Very slim. Because they just take you straight under and hold you there. They can hold their breath for like half hour.
Yeah, much longer than you. That's for sure.
You can't. Yeah.
And they're powerful as hell. Like, they're huge and strong. And they grab you, and if you don't die from the bite instantly, which could happen, it'll just drag you into the water and you'll be dead within probably 30 seconds or a minute. Probably less. Probably under 15 seconds, I'm guessing. Those things are terrifying. And by the way, I actually went like hunting in the outback where there's actual crocs, and like walked along the river with these, you know, these guys who know what they're doing. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And I'm like, the guys were just like, you know, keep your eyes on the water a little bit. You know, if you see any water, even shallow water, just like keep an eye on it. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'll keep my eye out for a fucking croc.
Damn, man. So you ship lending and then you're taking all kinds of risks now.
Yeah. That was an interesting experience, sleeping in the outback.
Yes, sleep more than 10 meters from the water as well.
Yeah.
Don't sleep on the bank.
No, you'd be dead. Even when we were sleeping away from the water, like throughout the night, you would just hear all sorts of animals and stuff. It's just very alive. Like, there were points where like there were like dingoes, literally probably, I would say maybe 1 or 2 feet from my head, but I was inside the tent, so I could hear them. I could hear the sniffing and hear them walking around, but I knew they were like right outside my tent. I was like, all right, I better not get out of this tent because that dingo's gonna eat me.
Should be right. Still good.
No dramas, mate.
Just pack some heat, you'll be fine.
That's hilarious. Well, welcome back stateside, Chad.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, man, it's only been 2.5 weeks since we shipped lending. I feel like it's been forever now. It can't just be me. I don't know.
No, it's not just you. It's just like the DeFi just moves at the speed of light, so everything seems like it's going, you know, faster than reality is, or slower, I should say.
Yeah, what's on the docket? You want to run through V121, the next version coming out?
Yeah. So next version, which hopefully will come out within a week-ish, or right around there. And there's 2 primary features of this that I can remember, at least from the top of my head. Maybe if I look at the actual merge PR, I'd think of another one. But the 2 primary things is, one is for keygens to retry more quickly. So as people might have noticed, like, we're having some difficulties getting the keygen to be more smooth in terms of the churn process. And so what happens is, every 3 days, the network tries to do a churn and generate new keys. And if it fails to do so for whatever reason, it'll retry like basically every hour on the hour until it gets a successful key gen. And so the change is basically going to retry it instead of every hour, it'll retry every 5 minutes or 10 minutes, something like this. And so we'll increase the number of attempts, by about 5 or 6x or something like this, so that things go a little bit faster. That's one thing we've been trying to get through. The second thing is mostly around integrating streaming swaps into savers. So you enter and exit savers, you get a much lower fee. So the yield that you generate while you're a saver kind of stays in your pocket, in a matter of speaking. And the same thing for lending, so that you can stream open a loan for stream open or stream close a loan for lending. And that's going to be really key, because I think I've heard from several people that there are people who want to take out larger scale loans, but they're not doing so because it's just the slip fees are just too much for their taste. So once we get this all integrated and running, then I'm hoping that we'll start to see lending kick up a good amount.
Cool. Yeah. So mostly just streaming swap integrations into lending and to savers, which will be pretty big. And entering and exiting with lower slip is going to be really nice, especially for people who are trying to do larger size. And I mean, we've seen just the success of streaming swaps across just like how much larger we can get swap sizes to be. So I think we'll probably see the same for savers ads and also just bigger loans being taken out. So I saw some big ones today, and I think there's been a couple moderate sized ones, but obviously no one's entering in with any kind of significant size just because of the amount of fees you got to pay.
Yeah, I saw a pretty decent ETH one today. That was pretty cool. But yeah, 100%. I think that'll be a huge feature to get bigger size coming in.
Yeah, I think somebody told me, and I'm obviously not going to say whom, but someone told me that they want to do like $1 million loan, and they're waiting for the streaming swaps integration with lending.
Nice. How much burn is that?
It's a lot. I mean, it's buying $1 million worth of ruin off the market and then burning it.
Oh yeah, I was thinking $1 million collateral, so I was thinking I'd have to do the math. But yeah, $1 million loan, that's pretty easy.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, I think there's quite a few people I've heard from who have all voiced the same thing. So they're just waiting on the sidelines, waiting for their opportunity to come in. So the funny thing is that getting streaming swaps to integrate with savers and with lending it ended up being much more complicated and much more difficult than I originally thought it was going to be. And so there's some good amount of technical kind of struggle in a sense in getting it all to work and flow correctly. But I think we should be able to figure it out eventually.
Yeah, is that just based on maybe partial fulfillments or pauses and accounting for all those types of scenarios where it's not instant fulfillment, or what actually adds all that complexity?
Yeah, I mean that's part of it. And so whenever you don't want to get in a situation where you have this partial fulfillment where say you're paying off a loan and then you get your collateral back, but you only get half your collateral back and half the collateral stays in the loan, for example. If you do that, it gets kind of wacky and wonky and oh, you already paid it off, but you only got half your collateral, so then how do you get the rest of it? You pay it off again? It doesn't make any sense. And so it just creates these kind of rough scenarios and situations that we just kind of want to avoid. And so the best way to do that is to avoid the whole, partial fulfillments. And so by doing that, we can do things like changing the rules, the laws around synthetics and how they work, and changing the laws around TVL caps, and changing some these things. It's nothing significant or crazy, or even, in my opinion, doesn't even really need much of an ADR or even a community vote. It's insignificant enough that it doesn't really make a difference. But it just adds a lot of scenarios you got to compute for or to calculate for. But it wasn't just that. Like once I got into the actual source code to code it out, there's like the way that the places where the code is, you need to change. They're not like all in the same place, and the way that kind of like the way they interact with each other, it kind of gives you a limited. I'm doing a terrible job explaining this, but like it's a limited resources, like limited information. It just becomes really kind of kludgy and kind of not quite smooth. And so to get it all to be smooth was just being more difficult and than I would have guessed walking into it.
Is that lending specifically or similar stuff on savers?
I think it's lending specifically. Lending's more complicated because there's multiple streams going on. Like there's a streaming swap to enter your collateral, and then there's a streaming swap to get your debt, or vice versa. You stream swap to pay back your debt, and streaming swap to get back your collateral. And like all those things are kind of like doing two swaps in a single thing, two streaming swaps like tied to each other. And they're not even two. It's a double swap. So it's like a 4 swaps, all kind of daisy chained together with a hook in the middle for the loan handler logic, and then it's just like it's a lot of kind of like things happening that we haven't needed to do something this complicated, and so it just created some difficulty. I think we'll be able to fix it. I think we'll be able to to figure it out, and I'm kind of waiting for some other code to merge and blah 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 to unblock me from continuing that work. But like, it's just being a little more in the pain in the ass than I would have thought. I thought it would have taken me just a couple hours to do it, and I ended up spending like more than a day, and it's still not quite right.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so how's everything else been around the lending launch? Anything that has caught your guys' attention on lending, like tweaks that need to be made, or just like any little things around that?
Yeah, there's one thing of tweaks that need to be made. So one of the attributes of the configuration of lending, one thing we talked about when we talked about the parameters of how lending is launched, like what are the configurations. And one of them kind of like tells the derived asset virtual pools of how sensitive they are to volatility, right? So how fast does the pool become shallow relative to the amount of volume passing through the layer 1 counterpart? And so we started off initially at like a value, and the value doesn't matter, but the value started off as like 60%. And at that time, 60% was the correct number, right? It gave you the correct behavior that we want to do, like the correct amount of sensitivity. But then what happened was we launched streaming swaps. And streaming swaps obviously created a lot more volume in the network, which is obviously a good thing. But now the 60% value was like, too small. It should be larger. So that basically made, because it was overly sensitive to the volume in the layer pools, like when it didn't need to be, it just got more trade volume because we introduced, a fundamentally changing feature like streaming swaps. And so that kind of configuration, I've always kind of seen as, even when like I was planning and coding and all these things, I've always kind of seen as like kind of like a temporary holding ground. That's like a reasonable first stab. You know what I mean? Like a reasonable first way of going at it. But I always kind of recognize that like, well, different pools are going to have different trade volume, and different numbers are going to be relative to different pools, and like all this kind of stuff. And then how does it account for, moving into a bull market, moving into a bear market, and just naturally having more trade volume or less trade volume, or maybe there's just like, big news today or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And how does the sensitivity adjust itself, or should it adjust itself to these kinds of events? And so there's been some work around devising some new math that instead of configuring this value to be some number like 60% or whatever, we configure a mathematical equation that determines what the value should be on a per pool basis. And it looks over the last 2 weeks of trade volume to determine how sensitive it should be. Like what is the actual trade volume we see of this particular pool over the last 2 weeks, and using that information, we can kind of tell the network how sensitive it should be for unusual, traffic or something like this. And so you can kind of think of it, if anybody's familiar with like the difficulty system in Bitcoin mining, Like in Bitcoin mining, every 2 weeks, the network kind of redefines what the complexity or the difficulty rating of like what they need to hash out. And in reality, that's like it's a number, literally actually a number coded into 64 characters. But like it changes based upon how many people are mining, right? So the more hash rate, the more CPUs that are mining Bitcoin every kind of couple of weeks, Bitcoin kind of observes this and then makes the difficulty more difficult or easy, depending upon which direction that the hash rate goes. And it does that to maintain that every block is effectively 10 minutes. Because if we didn't do this, as you add more hash rate, Bitcoin's block wouldn't be 10 minutes, it'd be 10 minutes, then it'd be 9 minutes, then it'd be 8 minutes, because we're increasing the amount of number of CPUs and computational power. But you want to keep more of a static estimated, soft 10 minutes. And so it recalculates its mine difficulty every kind of couple of weeks to kind of maintain that 2-week kind of time frame. And so when you suddenly see a sudden change in the hash rate of Bitcoin, like we saw when China banned mining in 3 of its provinces, we saw the hash rate of Bitcoin basically just drop by like over 50%. And now all of a sudden blocks were no longer 10 minutes. They were now 15 or 20 minutes or something like this. And so it eventually kind of fixed itself after 2 weeks, but it kind of has this sensitivity to the hash rate of Bitcoin. And so we are effectively doing something similar, but instead of looking at the hash rate of a coin or a network, whatever, we're looking at the volume of a particular pool, and then we're adjusting that kind of sensitivity to make it more difficult or more easy, depending upon how that changes. So if you do have a crazy day and the SEC announces they just did a Bitcoin ETF and trade volume increases like crazy amount, everybody's buying Bitcoin or whatever, right? You don't want that sensitivity to be like immediate, because maybe that's an attack. Actually, maybe it's something natural. Who knows? You want them to be kind of like delayed. And so the number that I thought was a reasonable first stab at it would be effectively 2 weeks. We can know at any 2-week time frame, what is the reasonable amount of trade volume we'll see in this particular pool. We can look averaging it out or take the median out over the last 2 weeks. So that's one configuration change that I'd like to see made at some point in the future, if that makes sense.
Yep, for sure. So we got streaming swaps, and we have the so what do you call this exactly? Like it's not really a difficulty adjustment, but it's a similar concept.
Yeah, the Mimir is called the max anchor slip. I think that's what it's called. Max pool anchor slip or something like this. Yeah, it's called the max anchor slip, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Cool, man. So yeah, lending is just chugging along.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else really. Like everything else has been pretty smooth. Like there were a few bugs we kind of fixed in the first couple of weeks, minor bugs around the quotes on point and this kind of stuff. Nothing too crazy. And I think in about 2 more weeks, or 1 week or 2 weeks, whatever it is, that the first loans will be able to close their loans, right? Because there's a 30-day minimum maturity of a loan before it can be closed. So it'll be really fascinating to see what happens there. Like our loans can be closed, are they can stay open? Like what percentage of them got closed? This kind of information, and we can kind of see how that affects the protocol.
Yeah, I think that'll inspire more trust too, just to like have spectators see like the system work in both directions. Lets it prove itself. So that, yeah, it'll be cool to see some close. I don't know why too many would close right away, but like I'm sure some will, just out of like, if nothing more than to test it out.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the price of Bitcoin or the price of ETH at the time, like 30 days ago to where it is now, I can't remember off the top of my head what the actual price difference is, but it doesn't feel like it's really shifted all that much. So there probably isn't really a lot of pressure for people to close their loans, or a reason to close their loans, unless you're just like kicking the tires and you just want to kind of open a loan and then close it just to kind of get a sense of it.
Yep, for sure. So other than that, BSC launch, which should be happening like pretty imminently. So what's the whole process around this? So the next churn, the vaults get created, and then the launch actually gets kicked off probably like this weekendish.
Yeah, pretty much. We have to wait for a churn so that everything can be created correctly and all that kind of stuff, which I think is already configured to go, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly. And then once that happens, somebody has to create the pool, which I'm assuming that'll be the treasury or maybe some random person in the community, doesn't matter who. And then we're off to the races, and people can start adding liquidity and start trading and all that kind of stuff.
Cool. So we just need to wait for the next churn for the vault to be created. So I kind of forget how the whole process goes for the new chains and vaults and stuff like that. I wasn't sure if we needed the next update or not for that to happen, but I think it should just happen on the next churn then, which should be tomorrow, perhaps 2 days.
Yes, I think so, but I have to look at my notes to be sure, because it's been a while since we've actually added a chain, to be honest.
It's true. The last one we added was what,
AVAX, I think. Yeah.
A year ago.
Yeah. I'm very fascinated to see how BSC works, like in terms of like adoption, because on the one hand, you have a chain that's like economically, it's very large, right? It's like the second largest chain economically, and for like, well, I guess third if you call it, if you can include Bitcoin, but like from a EVM perspective, it's the second largest, right? By a good margin too. And so you would naturally think that a chain with a lot of, volume and trades and liquidity, all that kind of stuff would be a good one to add. And in theory, I guess it could be. But like I think what I've recognized through adding many chains over the last couple of years, or a few chains more accurately, it's like just because something is an economic powerhouse doesn't necessarily mean that any liquidity is coming towards THORChain. And it's always super helpful to have members of that community come forward and do some cross marketing and getting the people behind the other project to kind of tell their community about it and get them hyped for it, and get our community hyped on their project, and do it more together. And like that's partially why THOReau was so successful as a chain that we launched, and it had wide adoption. We had 100 million in the pools, of the THOReau pools in total, I think it was, and in a relatively short period of time, because of that kind of working together. Versus when we add something like Doge, or we add something like AVAX, or we add something like BSC, and there's not really much cross pollination happening, between the two ecosystems. They tend to be a little bit more stale. But I think the argument for BSC might be that Trust Wallet's already integrated with us, and so Trust Wallet's probably one of the biggest wallets for BSC, and so once they integrate BSC on their side to allow swaps and trades and such, maybe that'll be enough. That's all we need.
Yeah, I definitely think in a perfect world, the cross pollination is obviously key. But on the other side, like just looking at DEX volume by chain on DeFi Llama, I mean, BSC is number 2 to Ethereum. So that's pretty freaking huge. And then, coming out with like DexAg right out the gate on that. And already, like you said, having like Trust Wallet, already having BSC ties and all of that. So I'm pretty excited about it. I think it could be hopefully, bigger than, let's say, AVAX. Not that that's doesn't have any potential for the future, but like hopefully it comes out the gate stronger.
Yeah, it might. It's kind of hard to tell, right? It's almost impossible to predict these kind of things. But the problem, one of the things we have to be concerned about is that like AVAX as a chain is not that complicated in terms of its like computational resources. BSC is actually quite large. Like each of these things are like lots of, like you need like 8 or 10 terabytes of space, which is a lot. Number of CPUs, number of like memories is a lot, and it's probably about $1,000 per month to run one of these full nodes for BSC, which is by far the most expensive one that we have currently. And so there's additional cost to the operators to run that thing. And now that Rune's price is better than it was when we were talking about BSC, like last time we talked about BSC, I think we were around $1, a little under $1. And so we would have needed the trade volume of the BNB chain, the current BNB chain, which is like the third largest contributing economically to THORChain. We would need to be about the same trade volume in order to generate enough revenue to just make it neutral for the operators. And the BNB chain, in terms of depth, it was relatively deep to the other chains, other pools and chains of the network. So we didn't even have the space to get the BSC pools to be deep enough to support large enough trades. Now that's kind of changed somewhat with streaming swaps. Right now that we have that launch, it kind of changes the equation to some degree. But if we can't, I'm hoping that BSC will surpass BNB in terms of trade volume and pool depth. I think that's my hope, but we won't really know until we wait and see.
Yeah, the biggest thing there definitely being Trust Wallet, and I do think it has more potential than something like AVAX or Atom, where there really wasn't any, like, there was nothing there to really drive any organic volume from like actual users on those networks. And we do already have Binance Beacon Chain, and like we're really the only venue for Bet2 assets pretty much anywhere, and doing quite a bit of volume with that. So yeah, man, we're just gonna have to see what happens, really. And yeah, it's gonna be a nice new chain to have, I hope. And I don't know. I do think that we'll get more, but like I don't know what we're gonna just have to see. I mean, there's really no way to just just predict what'll happen. So
Cow and also THOReau, if you could just magically have a wand and add any chain to the network, what would you choose?
I would actually, some might disagree with this, but and maybe now is not the right time for it, but I think Solana will be important. And I think Solana is very detached because it's like not just another EVM and all of that. So I find that just in my own personal, like using of THORChain, using occasionally bridges, and very avoidantly using centralized exchanges, that's where I get stuck all the time, is like trying to go from like anything THORChain supports to random tokens on Solana. I get stuck there all the time, and I really hate using, like, every time I try to use those bridges, I'm just like, oh my god, this is like the worst experience ever, and I'm just gonna give up. So that would actually be my vote.
yeah, if I could wave the wand, I mean, I got two. Definitely Solana. I'm totally agreeing with that take, and hopefully that could happen with like a light client or something like that. I think Pluto said before there's some potential there, but we'll have to see. I think we'll need to update TSS for that as well, right, Chad? So that would seem to be a ways out. Well, okay. So maybe there's three then. There's also obviously like Monero and like ring signatures, which is like, completely like something that no one else can do, which is obviously like big in its own right. And then third being Base. Coinbase is Optimism Stack L2 on Ethereum. I do see Coinbase just pulling in a lot of liquidity, and obviously we want to be wherever the liquidity is, and we already have not connections, but we're like we have a lot of Binance liquidity. We could pull in a lot of Coinbase liquidity as well, and we can kind of be this like middle connective layer between all these different stacks of like really where the liquidity is, and that's kind of where I see THORChain sitting. So it's like if we did have like a Ethereum L2, I mean, Base seems like a top contender, just because of the amount of activity and liquidity it can be, and just being able to be this like DeFi in the middle of all of the more centralized exchanges, and being like a layer of connective tissue there. What do you guys think about those choices?
Well, I'll break them each down. So for Solana, it's an interesting one for sure, and it's a very complicated one. I think you mentioned it's a EDDSA system, so which we don't actually support the EDDSA yet on the social singnatures yet, which is something I would like to remedy. But it's also very, like, those nodes are massive, like super, like 256 gigabytes of RAM, like just ultra massive. So it would be quite a lot of work for not just for the devs, but also for the node operators to put together the resources, especially now that we have, a good amount of the nodes are now on bare metal, which is great. But to get their nodes to expand to support something like Solana would be, quite a large amount of time and effort and money for the nodes to do so. So they definitely need a large amount of time to prepare themselves. On the other hand, like, I mean, I had some common friends with Anatoly, and so maybe I could arrange a sort of meeting, and maybe I'll try to do that just for the giggles of it, and just to kind of get like a temperature read from Anatoly about how open are they to interfacing with THORChain, because like they do have their bridging system, like Chad was talking about, and I feel like with AVAX they have their own bridging system as well, and they're pretty content with it, even though I can make valid arguments of why they shouldn't be, but they're quite happy and content with it, and they may not want to support like a native swaps across chains because they've doubled down on their own kind of situation with the wrapped assets and this kind of thing, and their trusted bridges and all this kind of stuff. So I'd be curious to know how open or how interested the Solana community would be. I can try to reach out to some people, but like, if they're down and they're like really excited about it, for me that would be a game changer. Like, I would be totally down to doing it myself. Would take a lot of work to get there. We have to make some changes to TSS. We make some changes to the infrastructure. Like, it would not be a small amount of work by any stretch. And even we have to build an entire new chain client, not a fork or something else, be a completely new chain client, which would be also a lot of work as well. So it would not be a cheap thing at all. But if Anatoly and the rest of the Solana community is behind it, that would make it more of a priority in my mind. The second one you said was Monero. I'm totally down. This would be my personal number one pick if I can just like wave a magic wand and get it added tomorrow. Monero would be the most valuable in my opinion, just because it's to take this technology, which in my opinion is probably the most hardened privacy system that we have in crypto, which I think is that ring signature system that they have for that crypto note design, would be absolutely huge for the industry to be able to have privacy on whatever you want, on more or less on any asset that you want. Like, that would be such a significant contribution to the space, much more than just bridging value from chain A to chain B, but now just bridging like the interoperability of privacy across multiple chains and assets. Like, that would be pretty amazing contribution to have. Base, on the other hand, like, I don't know, I have mixed feelings about Base. Like, there are some L2s we can add. Like, I think, Polygon's one that comes to mind, for example. There's a lot of liquidity there, and I know the Polygon team has an interest in getting THORChain added, so there's a little bit kind of cross-pollination going on with that one. I don't know how open Coinbase is to having Base integrated with them. Like, they're pretty tight-lipped. Our communications with them in the past has never been all that friendly. Not like it's adversarial or anything like this, but just not that welcoming in some sense. And so I'm not really sure how open they would be to integrating with us. But I'd be obviously totally open to have that conversation with whomever on the Coinbase side of things.
I feel that. I mean, okay, here's a question for the ETH L2 stack. So ETH L2s are essentially just contracts on the main chain that then roll up and then settle on the main chain, right? Why is it that you can't just create some kind of like generic implementation that can just like basically like use what we already have in running all of the Ethereum daemons and basically like create be able to deposit into those L2s without actually having to implement the L2 itself, because it's essentially just a roll up. You're just rolling up into the L1. So it's like, I'm just wondering why you can't just go the opposite way, and like we already have the L1 implementation, so why can't we use that to be able to support every single ETH L2 today?
Well, I think you can, right? You can do like effectively using DEX aggregation to swap to the layer 1 and then using DEX aggregation to push into the layer 2. But the negative of going that approach is that you're doing an extra hop of transactions. You're adding more time and you're adding more cost to it, because you have to make that ETH transaction first, which is obviously very expensive, and then you have to wait for it to be broadcast to the layer 2 through some bridging mechanism, which maybe that's something like what's the name of that EVM bridging. I'm blanking on the name right now. My brain's not working. But you could do that. You could totally do that. And it's actually like kind of an easy and low-hanging fruit way of doing that is just kind of using some other bridge to bridge, right? But if we do it directly, the benefit is that it's like less transactions, simpler, faster, that kind of thing. But the negative of going directly to the L2 is that now you have to have our own pool and our own liquidity and increase the security. And we only have so much security in the network, and how do we want to allocate that security? So it's just like if we create an L2 for base or whatever it might be, then we also have to have deep pools as well. And where's that security going to come from? What other things are taking away from in a matter of speaking? So it's just like there's definitely a give and take here, right? A pros and a cons. And I don't think it's clear cut, at least not in my view. People are welcome to argue with me, but it's not clear cut which one of those is actually the good design or the bad design. It's just pros and cons.
Yeah. Also, it's something else I've been thinking about with regards to new chains. So now that we have lending, which is essentially shorting major assets that are not Rune, I'm wondering if it makes sense to actually implement some of the largest market cap coins, something like Ripple or something like that, because in the past, obviously we want to implement coins that are that are large in market cap and have a high potential for a lot of volume. But now that we have lending, we are essentially taking bets on these coins going down in relation to Rune over a long period of time. So does it make more sense to implement really high market cap coins, something like a Ripple, name whatever else in the top 5, top 10? Does it make more sense to do that, even though there might not be some kind of broad community support for that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the how lending cap system works today is that it's capped on a per pool basis. And how large that cap is relative to the depth of the pools. So if we were to add Ripple tomorrow, let's just say, and it just never got much depth to it, right? It just kind of stays a shallow pool, then it's not really going to contribute that much value to the protocol, just because the amount of Ripple loans that will go out is relatively small. So there's not really much of an upside, and there's not really much of a downside either. It's not going to really push the success of lending or the protocol itself in any particular direction. We're not going to see the protocol collapse because of Ripple. We're not going to see it, go to $100 billion either, right? So, in terms of lending, you want, at least in the current moment, it makes sense to stay with higher cap assets to start, but we should start also experimenting with lower market cap assets, because they may sound like they're more risky, and in some sense they are, but there could be some aspects to market psychology and behavior that is actually more beneficial to use those assets over other ones. So, for example, say you were to add a new, shitcoin 2, right? I'm going to call it shitcoin 2. The odds that shitcoin 2 is going to go to, to $1 trillion market cap or $100 million market cap is relatively small, because most coins never get to $100 million market cap. They stay in the smaller ranges and so forth and so on. And so it's never going to grow for the vast majority of these kind of smaller market cap assets. They don't really go for very much, and 97 or 98% of them are going to go to zero. And if they go to zero, that's the best case scenario for the protocol. We can benefit effectively just by saying, 97%, 98% of crypto is going to fail and go to zero, and we can profit from that effectively as a protocol. We can profit from that scenario. The kind of the more bearish case of this is that this small market cap asset goes really well, and if it does get to $100 million, does get to half a billion or whatever the market cap might be, in which case that could be potentially bad for the protocol. But then it also comes in this place of like, well, what is the behavior of people, right? And this is kind of an interesting debate, and I'd like to see the data as we kind of find out over the coming 6 to 7 months or so. But like, if you are in a situation where your collateral of shitcoin 2 is pumping, it's gone to the moon, it's 50x in the last 3 months or something crazy like this, you effectively have two options. Now you can either close your loan, get back your shitcoin 2 token, and take profits, right? Sell some in the market, into stables or Bitcoin or whatever you want to do, right? And some people might do that. The other option is that you close the loan and then you reopen the loan with the same collateral, in which case you get a higher amount of debt. So it's in a sense like you start off with $1,000 in debt at the start of your situation, then we 50x'd the price of the shitcoin 2 asset, and now instead of going $1,000, if you close it and reopen it, you now got $50,000 in your pocket, assuming that the CR is the same as it was before, which probably isn't, but still, like, do you go for the free cash and go for that 50,000 in debt, and then use that 50,000 to buy more shitcoin 2 to kind of like leverage up your position on shitcoin 2 because you think it's going to go to the moon, quote unquote? Or are you a smart trader and are you going to DCA out, right, or take profits of the thing? So like you can make arguments in either direction, and I know people will do both, right? Obviously, the question is, where does the capital actually do? Is the capital kind of like taking profits, or is most of the capital kind of riding to the moon, right? And in this industry, most people are going to ride to the moon, but also people who are smart and kind of take profits are probably have a higher amount of capital in their pockets, right? Think of you like your TBRs, for example, right? That kind of trader has a lot more money in his pocket, so he has much more capital. So it's just like more people will probably kind of like just take the free money option and ride to the moon or ride to zero or whatever. But the smart people will probably have more capital in their pockets to be able and have a larger kind of weight behind them. And so we don't really know the answer to this question. We can hypothesize all we want, but I'm very fascinated to see what the actual market behavior is over the next like 6+ months.
What would be an example of when you think like a newer or smaller coin would actually be added as a new chain? Because like over the last few years, generally the idea has been don't add new stuff, like wait and kind of add like the OGs, add like the things that have kind of proven themselves. So are you kind of thinking like, oh, hypothetically next bull run, there's some hot L1 that hasn't even been created yet. We don't even know what it is yet. And maybe that makes sense to add like on a relatively short notice. Is that kind of what you're thinking? Like almost like how Terra was, like Terra came out pretty quick and there was so much of a push for it that it got added, on relative short notice in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's always going to be pressure from the community to add the new hotness thing, and whether that's Solana or that's Terra, whether it's AVAX, whether it's some new thing coming out, what's it called, SEI or whatever. Like there's always going to be some new hotness that everybody thinks is like the next big thing, crypto, and majority of times it's nowhere close to that. And so, but it's just up to the community to decide which ones they do and don't want to add. My general feeling personally, and for most cases, is like let it survive a full cycle, a bull market and a bear market. If it's still around and there's still demand, for it, then I'd say go for it. But at that point, the market cap of that asset will probably be it won't be that small of a market cap, to be honest.
Right. By that point, it's not really small.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I just don't see it happening personally. Like looking at how long it even takes to get BSC online, which is like that vote was what was it a year ago? It might have been over a year ago at this point. Like I just don't see it ever happening where we start going for like these like shiny brand new chains at least at like the current pace of things. And obviously that's because like there's so many other priorities, and maybe that changes one day where it's like, all right, all the major features are shipped, we're ossified, and now it's just like, oh well, what chains do we add?
Yeah, I mean that also was the economics for node operators during a bear market, right? Because before that, there were talks of like 20 chains in 1 year sort of thing, right? So who knows, like maybe there's a time where it makes sense to go into back to chain launching season.
We could add like non-gas assets, like, for example, maybe there's a push to add like GMX, right, as a open loans for GMX. Theoretically, we could do this. Whether we want to or not is obviously a debatable topic, but it doesn't have to be a new chain. It could just be a new asset within an existing chain too.
Right, right. Yeah, for the lending perspective, especially, or savers.
Right.
For swaps, it's less interesting, just if there's like already relatively straightforward paths to getting there.
Yep. Yep.
Hey, just boss at the start of that, I thought when you add another pool, whether it's the shitcoin or not, the depth or the cap for lending is based proportionally on the depth of the pool. So obviously a new pool, that's not, it's going to be quite lower. That the actual depth of it can be much lower than, say, the Bitcoin pool. So the cap is going to be then proportional to the depth of the pool. So the Bitcoin cap is going to be much higher than, say, the new shitcoin pool that has low liquidity. So that obviously then de-risks that particular new pool that's been added to lending when it has got a huge amount of depth compared to, say, the Bitcoin, the Ethereum pool, which is kind of interesting because then the Bitcoin Ethereum pool, in a way, because of the high depth, is going to have, in a way, more risk to the protocol, but it's a much more firmer and longer lasting, and you consider stable asset. And the same thing happened with impairment loss protection, because that's where all of the liability was, particularly in the Bitcoin pool, then the Ethereum pool, not in all the other smaller pools.
Yeah.
Just at that point.
That's true, but if there's a lot of hype around a particular chain or asset, then they can get big. I mean, we kind of talked about THOReau, how fast THOReau became a very deep pool, and if we were to do that, say we were to launch THOReau, like the THOReau equivalent tomorrow or whatever, and it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, it's gonna effectively like kind of vampire attack the other pools in terms of like lending, like the amount of the amount of cap available for Bitcoin and ETH is going to decrease because this new THOReau thing, whatever that is, that's growing really hard and fast, is kind of like taking away from those pools and adding it to the THOReau system, this new THOReau token, whatever the hell it is. So it's kind of an interesting thing to be considered as well. But I doubt we're going to be really talking about this in reality anytime soon, at least not for a couple of years.
That's more or less what my question was going to be, Chad. And thanks again for hosting these events. Always great. It seems that in the past, it's kind of been most successful to kind of launch features during bear markets, and we start adding more coins more during bulls when there's a lot more liquidity due to the room price being a little bit higher. And so I'm just wondering, is this kind of more of a thought experiment, or are we seriously talking about adding more chains this quickly? I think the BSC integration is fantastic, but I really do love all the features we've been talking about, perps, continuing streaming swaps and lending and things like that. So just kind of wondering if this is more of a thought experiment, or if, I guess, how close to real is this?
I mean, in my viewpoint, in my 2 cents, it's more of a thought experiment than anything else. There's not really a strong push to add additional chains after BSC. And I think the reason why we're even talking about it now is just because of, a vote that took place a year ago, whatever the hell the number was. It's not really great to add new chains during the bear markets, as you kind of mentioned a moment ago. And I think this time is probably better suited for focusing on core functionality and kind of ironing out the bugs or the rough edges of new features like streaming swaps or lending and this kind of thing, so that when we get to the bull market, we have all these powerful new features that can really contribute a lot of significant value to the industry, and they're just kind of ready to go, and they're already battle hardened to some degree, and kind of have a good faith that they're pretty strong and ironclad for the most part. So I think for right now, over the next 6 months or so, I think the focus is really more on major core features and not so much new chains. But that's just my 2 cents, and my 2 cents is not reality. So people are welcome to debate and advocate for what they want to see happen.
Yeah, we'll definitely be up to the community, but I tend to agree with your thought process. So thank you very much.
What would your answer be for the magic wand question, Fox?
Oh, that's a hard one. Honestly, it would probably be a Haven, a Monero, something privacy focused. But after that, I really do think in a long enough time frame, having some of our friendly forks start experimenting with other coins and letting THORChain really harden. Eventually, there will come a time where there doesn't have to be a next chain, or at least wait until another chain has really proven itself. So I'm not rushing into anything personally, but yeah, definitely up to the community.
Yeah, I think I'm totally agreed with that. Just core functionality comes before new chains, because like we already have the biggest, and I definitely think the BSC launch will be kind of the moment where we can determine whether if it's really worth the effort to launch new chains or not. Because I think a lot of us can agree this is like the best shot at like a new chain. Obviously, like barring like shiny new things like a Monero, which is like a completely different type of like new chain. But this is, I think most people would agree that it's the best shot at like a generic chain implementation that could be successful. So if it's not successful, then I think that'll definitely show itself, and it would result in not really any pushes for new chains, which has already been the case for the past year. Like no one's really been clamoring to add new chains besides BSC. So it'll definitely like whatever the result of the experiment is. I think it'll be clear like whether it was actually worth it to add the new chains, or whether it's like, all right, well, we should have just like stuck without it and we would have been fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think I generally agree. Unless a chain is the strong support from that chain to be added to THORChain, that's to me like the main indicator whether or not I'd be interested in adding that particular chain, even if it's a smaller chain like Dash or like Radix or something like this. Like if that community's like dead behind it, then I'm more open to it at that time. And the exception I would say is Monero, and the reason why that's an exception is because we're adding most chains to add more liquidity and more trade volume and this kind of thing, which is obviously good. But for Monero, it's less about kind of like the economic contribution to the network, and it's more about, at least in my mind, it's more about adding the functionality of privacy to the network, which I'm totally down for. And then the whole thing with FamiliarCash, like whatever, keep shipping.
Cool. Any other major topics that you guys want to cover today?
I think the next major feature that is fairly close, which will be the following release, probably in version 1.22, maybe 1.23, it might get pushed back, but 1.22 is this concept of memoless transactions, which I think I'm getting more and more bullish on. I think it's an interesting idea to start with, but I think the more I think about it, the more I kind of start to like it more and more. And allowing memoless transactions will just open up this network to be accessible by so many more people. I'm very fascinated to see what happens with that.
So how does that work exactly? Like, is the interface sending like a separate transaction with the instructions to THORChain on behalf of a memoless inbound? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so the interface, like THORSUP could do this or somebody else could do this, but like the interface would broadcast a transaction on THORChain and then say, hey, here's a memo. This is the actual memo, and the inbound is coming from Bitcoin, just say. Like the incoming chain is Bitcoin. And so the network will then assign some sort of like numerical value, like a 5-digit numerical value that is kind of like a reference code for that particular chain, for that particular like memo. And so when you sign and broadcast your transaction from your wallet, you don't need a memo at all. You just send some Bitcoin to the one of the Asgard vaults, and just make sure that 5-digit code is like the end of your amount that you're sending to the network. So if you want to send 1 Bitcoin, you wouldn't send exactly 1 Bitcoin. You send 1.000 1.0001573 or something, some number, some 1573. And so it's encoding in the amount what the actual memo is. And then once we receive that kind of amount, we look it up in our little internal storage and say, oh, what's the memo associated with this particular 5-digit code, 12753, whatever the hell the number is.
Got it. So the dust is the code.
The dust is the code, and the dust tells the network what the actual intention is. And you can do anything. You can do swapping, you can do a liquidity add, you can open a loan, you could arbitrarily, you can do any memo you want, right? And so now every wallet can now support THORChain, which would be, I think, pretty awesome, because then you can, go ahead.
So I'm just trying to imagine it because like in the perfect way I imagine it, it would be like, oh, just send 1 BTC to this address and you're good to go. But am I understanding like the only way this would be possible would be like actually send 1.0005384 Bitcoin to this address?
Correct.
Got it.
Correct.
It's actually pretty easy, because all you'd have to do is generate a QR code that just encodes that in it, and it'll just automatically open up your wallet and queue up a send to the THORChain inbound address, and just all you got to do is press send after that.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you can easily create a really simple and very clean UI where you just go to some web page, you say, hey, I got some Bitcoin and I want USDT on Ethereum or whatever it is, and then it generates a QR code, scan it and send. Right? You can keep it so clean, so simple, so fast, so cheap. It would just be like a godsend. You don't have to connect your wallet. You don't have to you can make the UI so dumb simple with no options, no advanced anything. It's just for clean, fast, simple execution. Done. And that it just works, But if your wallet doesn't support like a QR code, like Ledger, for example, you can always it'll display underneath the QR code like, oh, copy and paste this Bitcoin address and this amount, and just don't change any of this stuff. Just copy and paste it, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm still getting my head around this idea and thinking through all the different ways of kind of packaging it up, but it's really fascinating.
Yeah, I was talking to THORChain Bowl about building a UI that basically does this to garner as much support and trade volume to the network as possible by making a very simple, dumb UI that you can just easily trade so fast and so cheap. But the community, I got some feedback from the community that some people feel, and I'd be interested to hear what you all on the speakership here would think as well, because I'm just curious to have an open and honest conversation. There was some pushback from the community that me as a core dev should not get involved in building any kind of UI whatsoever, and that I should stay, I don't know, maybe neutral is the right word or whatever. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that was a thought that crossed my mind, because I just remember, I believe you or others saying that that it would be a good idea to keep the core protocol separate from the interfaces. That was kind of an idea that was always floating around our space, right? So I don't know if I have a personal opinion necessarily, but it was more of surprise, just kind of to hear that those lines could potentially blur. But yeah, I don't know. Thinking about it, I don't know, your personal risk comes to mind for sure. Things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you should just do what you want, Chad. I don't think that there's really any kind of line, because it's not like you hold any kind of undue influence over the protocol. You're just a dev, and you hold the will of the nodes in favor, right? And it's not like you're creating some kind of canonical interface. It's just your interface. Like I could make my own interface and launch it, and that doesn't really change anything, right? You still have to garner adoption, you have to provide support, and it's no small task to do. But obviously, like you really should take your own personal risk into consideration, because front ends are the most likely to, be targets of, some kind of regulatory action, or even just providing a bad user experience, like some kind of bug that loses users funds. Like, you don't want to be responsible for something like that. So yeah, those are just my 2 cents. You just, do what you're going to do, but just be careful.
I just think it depends on how you label it. If you just have an independent, I don't think it'll be a problem. But if you say THORChain's official interface, that's probably not the best, which I'm sure you won't do.
No.
Asgard X was. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, so Asgard X, I think Asgard.exchange was the official one, and then Asgard X as well for MCCN launch. But that's now, it was kind of like half separated, but, quite official, unofficial, and now it's separated as well. So if you have something like that that's separated, it's got some different branding, labeling. I think it's fine, and then, you support that. You could say you support the development of that. I guess you support the development of all interfaces in a way, with directly as well, through providing assistance on how they get built, even though you're not directly on the team. So I don't think there's any issue with it. It's just being smart about how it gets done.
Yeah, for sure, it wouldn't be as Cow said, like it wouldn't become the canonical UI, like the official UI of THORChain or anything like this. It would just be independent UI that would independently be launching, and and that kind of thing. And I probably wouldn't even seek the treasury funds to support it. Like we've used the treasury in the past to help fund the development and building of AskRX and THORSwap in the early days, and a bunch of other things. And it's just a natural thing to happen. But maybe in the interest of not getting too conflicted or having, the wires kind of crossed in a sense, I'd be fine with just funding it myself and not seeking treasury funds.
It seems in general, interfaces have their own token to allow for like the incentives to fund the development, right? So in my mind, the only way for this to work is to have the developers already be incentivized by Rune itself, right? Which I think that's why it puts you in like a unique situation. Not completely unique, but there are few potential teams that could pull it off just by kind of like their bet on Rune itself, rather than having like an interface that charges a fee, and then that having like, community ownership and such, like THORSwap as an example.
Yeah, and I think like something like this in my mind, it's just, I would look at it as kind of like a weekend project in a sense, like just a fast build, easy build, clean, simple, no bells and whistles, just fast, easy, cheap trading. And so because of that, it would never really be a competitor against like THORSwap or whatever, because THORSwap will be much more polished, much more featureful, and actually require a dev team that maintains and fixes and blah, 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 and all these things, and adds new features and functionality and all these things. And for me, this wouldn't be that. It would just be a super clean, super fast, super cheap UI, in and out, done. And it wouldn't require much maintenance or upkeep or even a dev team at all, outside of just the initial construction of it,
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would consider is that we don't really need more UIs we don't need more brand new UIs for THORChain. Like there's definitely plenty of, and not that you can't innovate or whatever, but there's a core community. There's people that use THORSwap, there's people that use Shapeshift, there's people that use Trust Wallet, and each has like their own users and like we don't, in my opinion, we don't really need new, like brand new interfaces. You're not, because you're not creating net new users that way. Like the real value add is getting existing interfaces that have a lot of users and funneling volume through that. So it's like essentially by creating like a brand new interface, it's just like reallocating existing users from like one interface and saying like, oh well, I can pay less fees on Chad Swap, so I'm just going to do that instead of supporting THORswap or giving a donation to Shapeshift or something like that in the process. So like I do totally understand like what it is you're trying to build, but like also just like thinking about like what the actual value add is for the ecosystem is important too. Like we already have like an AsgardX, which has low fees, completely open source, and we already have all these really great community built interfaces too. So just another thing to consider.
Yeah, I think my motivation and THORChain Bull's motivation to do something like this is just to create a super easy and cheap UI, right? So people can trade very cheaply if they want to, and not take out a bunch of basis points from their trade. And the reason why we like the idea of that is because if you do that, then the trades become even cheaper, which in theory should make the volume increase, which I think both THORChain and Bull and myself are not really interested or even attempting to make any money from something like this. It's just there to help garner more volume into the network itself.
Right. But who does that undercut? It undercuts community UIs like THORswap,
right.
like Shapeshift, like et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, but that's just like, to me, that's just the free market doing what the free market does, right?
It is, but again, it can only be done by people with fat rune bags, right?
Well, no, I wouldn't agree with that, because I think in this particular instance with this kind of UI, because it's so simple and clean and non-complex and non-featureful and all these things, you don't actually need to fund it, because you can
right.
build
It can be like a public good essentially.
Yeah, public. That's exactly what it is. It's just public good. THORswap, because what it's trying to do is create this really advanced swapping interface where you've got like DEX aggregation, and you've got all these functionalities, and like you can do a streaming swap or not a streaming swap, and you can do lending and borrowing, and you can do all these other, which is all those things are like awesome. And THORswap does a great job of that. This is just more like clean and simple, done out the door, and then it's just basically going to be ossified code at that point for the most part, unless there's some sort of backwards incompatible breaking change that occurs some point in the future of THORChain, which probably is not going to happen, to be honest. And like everything, all the code that I would write, and this has been true for most of my adult life, whenever possible, is all open source and MIT license. And so anybody can take this and put a new skin on it, a new domain, and relaunch it under, and then apply their own basis point. They want to apply a 30 basis point to that, then have at it. It's all free and open source.
Did Ayo have some comments?
Yeah, sorry, 1 second. I'm gonna have. It's a completely different. Completely different change of subject. And I'm probably gonna have to go after I ask this question, so I'll listen to the response on the recording. But oh wait, first of all, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So, yeah, sorry to change the subject. I was just daydreaming the other day, and I just wanted to know if something like this is possible. It's about THORChain or Thor likes, something else using the kind of THORChain security. So basically, I read a tweet the other day that was like, oh yeah, the thing I think of THORChain as is just solving the decentralized custodial problem. I was like, oh, I agree with that. And then like maybe the second thing it does is swaps. And like, it's a bunch of liquidity pools that are securely custodied. That's kind of like one way of looking at it. So I was thinking, So I am a like Bitcoin worrier when it comes to the transactions, like supporting the security over time. And I'm also like a Bitcoin worrier when it comes to privacy. And I was saying, if these THORChains or Thor likes are, a bunch of liquidity pools, and it's the protocol just facilitates transactions, and coin joins are just like transactions that are done in a certain way. Is it possible, like, is it feasible that there could be like some Thor like one day that is this like outside pool vending machine that just says, hey, we'll mix, or we'll hold a THOReau cache where you can get a receipt for you, and it's just for Bitcoin? Like, is that a feasible thing? Anyways, that was my question. Sorry to change the subject.
Is it feasible? Yes, that is feasible. We could, in theory, build a coin join to some regard, but you probably couldn't do it with the layer ones. And the reason why that is because you can't obscure the information of like inbounds and outbounds of the layer ones, like of the Bitcoin and ETH. It's a little bit easier if it's a native asset to THORChain. So if you were to like swap to a synthetic or a derived asset, something like this, and then do a coin join within that would probably be easier to execute, in my opinion. But coin joins and that kind of stuff is very difficult to do. And even if you do it well, it doesn't give you as much privacy as you would like. Like, it would give you enough privacy to obscure a transaction from, a hot dog stand on the street, but it wouldn't probably give you enough protection against like government agencies or like chain analysis companies and this kind of stuff. It really requires coin joins are more valuable the more transactions and volume passing through it. And so because THORChain doesn't have enough volume passing through it in this moment, it wouldn't be very helpful, to be honest with you. And that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of more bullish on utilizing something like Monero with its rig signatures, is that it's in some ways it's kind of like a mixer. Although I don't think it's technically true, but it's somewhat similar. And it does it very effectively, does it very well, and it does it probably better than anything that I could build, to be honest with you. And so I kind of like, we had the conversation as a team very early on, years ago, like this is like 3-4 years ago, about whether or not we should do privacy and within THORChain itself. And we ended up deciding not to do it, not because we hate privacy or anything like that. It's more of like, it changes the economics of the network if you do introduce privacy. And then you have these kind of like in-chain interactions, which can kind of like remove the privacy aspect to it to some regard, because you have to publicly say information, blah, blah, blah. Whereas rig signatures, you don't. And so like, it just became abundantly clear that what we're trying to do is cross-chain kind of interactivity and not so much privacy. And if you are going to do privacy, we just didn't have the right team at that time to actually to do it properly, to do it really well. I'm not a cryptographer myself, for example. And instead, we would just pull upon other people who are, like Monero, like Zcash, like, these kind of characters. And that just seemed like a more reasonable and more foolproof way, because we don't have to do the work ourselves, and we rely on people who are very smart, much smarter than myself, who can do that stuff really, really well. So I don't have it planned in my mind to do any kind of privacy on THORChain. And I say that as somebody who is an advocate for privacy, who appreciates privacy and sees its value. But I'm just saying that we should probably not try to reinvent the wheel in this particular case, because I don't think we can be able to do it very effectively or very well, and just utilize something that it does do it really well, like THOReau Cash or Zcash or these kind of things.
All right, great, thanks. Oh, I guess I would want to quickly say, whether or not THORChain would do something like that, I was mostly wondering if it's feasible, because one of the things, like I said, I worry about is the transaction fees supporting Bitcoin in the future. So I thought, if there's this Thor-like on the side that is constantly doing something, constantly doing transactions to mix around, I just thought that kind of worked well with dealing with privacy and having, transaction fees go up. Yeah, it's got to go. Thanks.
Thanks for your question.
Real quick, I can't be the only one that thinks that AO sounds like Eric Voorhees. Am I, wrong?
Didn't cross my mind,
Well,
but
listen to the recording.
I'll have
I think you're wrong. I think you're wrong.
I'll have to go back and listen while looking at Eric's face.
I've got a question. So when you add to THORChain, there's a thought about like as a liquidity provider, you send BTC in. If you follow the UTXO, because of churning, it's constantly going to be moving to a new address. Every time a churn happens. But if you withdraw the same amount to the same address that you deposited, but then the game's over because obviously you've got that back. But if you could withdraw somehow or it in different amounts, then you could have a way of, you could say, breaking the on-chain analysis heuristics because you've got all of these churns, all of these transfers in the middle between when you added and then when you withdraw. Is that something you'd thought of, or is it you can't really withdraw to something you didn't add to because you can't prove that you own the address?
Well, the churning aspect in my mind doesn't actually help increase privacy at all because the chain analysis can just like drop that from being considered as part of the complexity. Yeah, it really all depends on the actual inbound and outbound volume. That the more of that's happening, basically the more privacy you get. So there's a correlational relationship there, which I'm not sure if that's linear or exponential or what the actual relationship actually is. But it is hard to do, and that's why, like, for example, if you were to deposit a Bitcoin and then like withdraw it a minute later, then it would be pretty easy and obvious to see that there's a high likelihood of those two transactions of the same person. But even in the case of like of Monero, for example, when you send a transfer token to Monero, you actually cannot spend that UTXO for, I think it's like 20 blocks, right? They kind of force you in some sense to not spend that UTXO for some period of time. And the reason why they force you to do that is because if you spend it immediately afterwards, then you kind of degrade the quality of the ring signatures that are trying to obscure the information. Because every time there's a transaction in Monero, there's actually 10 transactions that are happening. 9 of them are fake and 1 of them is real. And it's kind of hard to discern which ones are which. But if you make a transaction and then do another one like a moment later, then you can kind of say, well, instead of there being 10 transactions, 1's real, 9 are fake. Now there's 10 transactions, 1's real, and 8 are fake because it's kind of easy to tell which ones are which. And so that kind of like degrades the quality of the privacy, from my understanding. So it's not so much the churns that matter; it's really just the throughput. And in my opinion, we're not really close to a point of high enough throughput on THORChain that we could build an effective or a high quality mixer, in my opinion. But maybe I'm wrong about that. I'm not a cryptography expert. I'd be happy to learn more if from the community or others who know more about this topic than I do. But I'm open to discussing this downstream, maybe one day. But for right now, it doesn't seem like it's all that viable.
Yeah, I think for any listen, even like Samurai and stuff like that, whatever you do, you need enough volume to break the heuristic. Because if you're like a 0.1% of the transactions of UTXOs that do that, it doesn't really have an effect. You're trying to really stuff with the heuristics enough that it's no longer valid. That's my understanding.
Right. That's correct.
Also brought up Laban's speaker and bringing up Arabex Young.
Good. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, yeah. Since we're talking about privacy and also throwing around next chain, and you threw around Zcash, obviously Monero, it sounds like it's been determined as too, a little bit complicated, not straightforward. But for Zcash, my understanding is that you would only have to integrate the transparent chain. And then obviously we have this support of the community, and that we had Zuko was on one of the spaces. I mean, is that right, that it would be a fairly straightforward integration if we just did the transparent chain?
In theory, yes. We've looked at that in the past. The problem we ran into, if my memory serves me correctly, is that when we did the Bitcoin chain integration, it utilizes a series of Bitcoin, libraries that we pull upon to be able to do what it is that we do. And there either isn't a equivalent or a fork of that library for Zcash, or there is one and it's not as featureful, or it's an older fork and they haven't pulled from the upstream in a good amount of time. And so I think that was the biggest blocker. And then there was a conversation at one point about trying to convince Zuko and the foundation over at Zcash to fund somebody on their side, then the devs on their side, to fork these libraries on Bitcoin, or update them to be more closer to the tip. And once that happens, then it becomes a lot easier for us to do the chain client work and get it all worked up and that kind of stuff. So I'm totally down to doing a Zcash or Monero. Zcash is obviously a lot easier to do, but there's still some challenges to overcome.
Cool, thanks.
I also believe that I think it's Nighthawk. I think they have a wallet and they have a dev team. They've mentioned that they were working on a THORChain integration, but I haven't really heard much about that. I've heard no discussion about that at all, really. So whether that's still in progress or not, I'm not really sure. But they have there are teams that have voiced interest in actually developing the Zcash integration. So I think Nighthawk said they were targeting some kind of Q4 dev work for this. So it might be good to, it's probably good for my list to poke these guys and see, what their status is, whether it's something they're going to work on or not. But there definitely is interest from that side of things. And also, that's a good one to add to the next chain list, I think.
Certainly, I totally agree.
Cool. One other thing I wanted to bring up, I pinned a tweet to the top of the space. Noah Jessup, who is one of the founders of Nine Realms, also institutional investor at Proof Group, published a report on THORChain and Rune just today. So definitely go check that out, retweet, like it, or just read the PDF. And it's a pretty nice view at just 10,000 foot view of THORChain, and just a really nice analysis of the fundamentals of the network. So if you're here, then I'm assuming you're interested in THORChain, but definitely check out the institutional report that Noah published earlier today. It's got a lot of really great info and thoughts in there. And Noah is just a huge supporter of the protocol, and definitely doing everything you can to help the protocol grow and succeed. So great report. I don't know if you guys have read it yet, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's definitely well written for sure.
Yeah, I looked through the thread, not the full report yet, but seemed really high quality. So yeah, really cool.
The other thing similar to that, CTO Larson, I'm not sure if I pronounced his name right, but he came out with a really good update video the other day. I'm going to see if I can find it and pin it here somewhere. But that's another good one worth taking a look.
Yeah, he's pretty well researched and presents a very, very balanced view of things for sure. So definitely check that one out. I really enjoyed that. Only a couple of small nuances that he got wrong, which I think is pretty tough to do from someone from the outside of looking at this stuff all day. So great job to CTO Larson on that.
Him and I are chatting about doing a little sit down chat and recording it and putting it on the interwebs. So something to look forward to.
Nice, man. That'll be awesome.
I'm actually would be really excited to talk to him specifically, because one of my pet peeves I've done interviews, a bunch throughout the years, and one of my pet peeves of doing interviews is that I don't get asked difficult questions. Like I really like it when people like, give me the hard stuff, right? The non-rosy stuff, and we have an honest and clear, conversation with those things. And so I think CTO Lars, he's like very good about having a very measured way of looking at things and not getting too like, pumpy about things or whatever. He's very objective in the way that he looks at things, which is something I really value and appreciate about him. And so I feel like if him and I had a conversation, he would ask me some really difficult or tough questions, which I would be, excited to answer, just because I want there to be more knowledge. I want people to be aware of not just the rosy stuff, but also, the edges, and and be honest about these things rather than just paint the moon picture all the time.
Yeah, that's why I like doing these spaces, because we really can just have like the open forum, to be honest. Because most of the time, like talking short form, it's so hard to be nuanced about things, and we really get deep into the weeds here. So that's why I really enjoy just coming on with you guys and getting deep into it, because there's a lot of complexity going into this whole thing.
I can give you some difficult questions if you want, Chad.
Hey man, always down for it. So I always show up
We'll do something.
These spaces, and people are welcome. Anybody can come on stage and ask me any question they want, and I'll do the best I can to answer it. So.
I'll give you a more simple one. I'm trying to figure out why does the price add liquidity memo v1 go to the archive file? But that's different. The share factor. So one of the things, the incentive pendulum doesn't move to the node because of the effective hard cap, which means it can't swing freely. And I think that's because the free of moving to the LP side and the node side was part of the original design for THORChain. But with the effective hard cap, it can't move all the way to, you can't have the total pooled equaling the total bonded because of the effective hard cap. But that means that nodes are always going to get, I think, a better deal from memory. So are there any thoughts around changing that to cater for the effective hard cap or the security cap?
Yeah, nodes actually get a worse deal because it could never swing completely in their favor.
It's something like that, because there's a whole history to it, because the incentive curve was also added, I think it's set at 50%, because nodes were getting paid too much. So then, because instead of having the 66-33 split in optimal, the incentive curve changes it to a 50-50. But yeah, I forget the details. I did it right up, but it can't move freely because of the effective hard cap like it once did. And I know that's not 100% right. And I was wondering if there's any plans to change that or to address that.
Yeah. So when we actually introduced the idea of the effective hard cap, it was a correction to the economics. That's something we realized we had missed in the initial kind of writing of the code, and so we implemented it. And I remember having a debate with some of the devs about changing this as well, the thing that you're mentioning, and it was something that I advocated we changed as well. But it was just kind of I guess I just lost that particular argument at the time, and I don't even remember off the top of my head what the argument was against it. But fast forward to now, that was like 2 years ago, something like this, a year ago. I think probably closer to 2. And I think there's more support amongst the devs to change the behavior. So, and I think it probably will happen at some point. The reason why it's not done now, or we're not pushing for it now, it was largely because of the amount of ILP liability in the network. And so to shift that, get while Rune's at $1 or a sub-dollar, and have at the time there was 15 million or something like this ILP liability, to do that at that moment and then all of a sudden decrease the yield of LPs. We were a little bit nervous about doing that and then causing a bunch of LPs to leave, which would cause a bunch of ILP to be paid out, which caused a bunch of Rune to exit the reserve. We didn't want to create more incentive at that moment for that kind of behavior. And so I think the general viewpoint that I have is I'm all for changing it and correcting this thing that you're referencing, but I would just want to wait for ILP liability to be relatively low, when Rune's at $2 or $3 or something like this, where the total ILP liability is under 1 million Rune or 500,000 Rune or some number. And so we're not too far away from that. And now that we've had room kind of pump a bit since then, since the like sub dollar price. So the ILP liability today is relatively smaller than what it was, a few months ago. So at some point, I think we probably will change that, and there will probably be a vote or an ADR to change that that kind of the economics there, just to kind of create the full swing in either direction.
So really taking it back to the original way.
Yes, I think the intention of myself and other people is to bring it back to the original intention, and what we had changed like a couple of years ago probably wasn't. I mean, it's fine, like it's going to cause any significant issues, but it wasn't the right thing to do in hindsight.
Cool.
Finblue, and I think there's someone else that was up here. Anyone else can come up after these questions are done. We'll wrap it up. What's up, man?
Yeah, so I had a question about streaming into lending. I was just wondering, as I understood the current design that doesn't have streaming into lending, part of the defense mechanism for the protocol is if there's a panic and whales are trying to exit all of a sudden, they're going to pay pretty huge slip, and the people who aren't paying attention are going to be getting 10,000 APY, real APY, or whatever it is. And so when they finally wake up, they're going to be like, well, I did pretty well, so I'm not going to leave. And the slip, on the out of the loan is kind of what, to some degree, protects the protocol. How does that change now that people can stream, particularly stream out of a loan, if there is some sort of a panic? How's the protocol still protected?
Yeah, good question. So the more, if you're doing a streaming swap, the more sub trades you have, the more savings you have, right? And you have a diminishing returns, like every additional sub swap is diminishing returns from the previous one about how much additional savings you have. And so the network takes, so if you want to calculate what the savings are of that, so say you had 10 swaps, for example, in a streaming swap, and you want to know how much savings that is, you're effectively doing, the math is 10 minus 1 divided by 10 in this particular case. So it's 9 divided by 10, which basically is 90%. And so if you just do the math and you create all this stuff, you can actually calculate to a reasonable degree. It's actually not precisely accurate, but it's reasonably accurate to figure out how many swaps will give you how much of a savings, right? And so to address this concern that you're talking about, the network will apply a max number of sub swaps on a streaming swap that's used for lending purposes to either enter or exit a loan. And so the total max quantity that it will allow kind of gets tuned down, right? The more trade volume there is in the layer one pool. So in a scenario where, say we're at a place where we're kind of sitting still, like we're pretty neutral on the volatility of the layer one pool. It's kind of, the pool depth of the derived virtual pool is, let's just call it 95% of the layer one. Then at that point, with this mathematics of how it works, you would only get a maximum number of 20 swaps for a particular streaming swap. And this is like a complete neutral, everything is fine, nobody's price manipulating or nobody's panicking or any of these things. You get basically 20 swaps. But as soon as it drops down to 90, right, from 95 to 90, you now get 10 swaps, right? So you've also just lost the total number of swaps that you can have is now at 10. And it goes down from there, right? So you start at 20, then you go down to 10, and it goes down to 9, 8, blah, blah, blah. And so eventually you get to the place where you get to 49.99999. And once you get to that place, the max number of streaming swaps is now 1, right? Which is basically not a streaming swap anymore. It's just a single trade. So the network will dynamically kind of reduce the number of streaming swaps you are allowed to have for this particular entry or exit based upon the amount of volatility of the layer one pool, right? Now, the other thing you have to be kind of aware of is that as the layer one as a derived virtual pool is getting more and more shallow because the trade volume is increasing because people are panicking or whatever the hell the scenario is, and it's getting more and more and more shallow, that means that each individual subswap of this trade is actually reducing, right? So if it was just like 100% to 100%, everything's at full capacity, no reduction in the virtual pool, you're going to get, I'm making up numbers here, let's just call it $5,000 swaps, right? That will give you 5 basis points because of the depth of these two pools. It's about $5,000. Now, if you reduce one of those pools to be 90%, it's no longer $5,000. Now it's going to be, I'm making up numbers, $4,000, $3,000, whatever the number is. And it just increasingly gets smaller and smaller. So in order to maintain that 5 basis points on the pool that's becoming shallower and shallower, one of the two pools becoming shallower and shallower, the number of swaps that you need to maintain that 5 basis points, like low slippage, increases from maybe initially it would have taken 5 trades, but now because the pool is so much more shallow, you now need 15 trades or 36 trades or 102 trades or whatever it is. And so the more shallow the virtual pool gets, the more trades you need to make in order to maintain that same 5% basis points. But at the same time, the virtual the cap on the streaming swaps for lending is being reduced. So in a situation where everything is healthy and everything's fine and nothing's happening, well, then the pools are deep, right? And the amount of streaming swaps you can have will probably be close to around 20, right? And any given moment, probably, right? And that's pretty good. Like that's basically a streaming swap. Most trades can do under 20 trades, and everything will be fine. And you get the 5 basis points. Everything's cool. Everything's great. But as soon as things get more shallow, more trade volume, more shallow, the virtual pool, you need more trades. Now you said 20, you now need 40. And because the depth is now smaller as well, you now can't do 40. You can only do 5. And because you're doing 5, not 40, you're not getting 5 basis points. You're getting 20 basis points or 50 basis points or whatever the hell the number is. And so it just dynamically scales down streaming swaps as trade volume increases to counteract the consideration or risk of somebody doing a price manipulation, which, by the way, like price manipulation becomes more difficult in a streaming swap because it's not happening in the moment, right? So if you price manipulate and you get this like streaming swap that's happening over a period of blocks, whatever that is, it's actually, you have to maintain that manipulation of that price for some period of time, which become more and more expensive because our bots are fighting you. You're trying to manipulate the price, which is very expensive for you. Our bots are taking use of that money that you're spending, and they're cashing in. They're making huge dollars. They're happy as the clams, and they're constantly making more and more money. And you start fighting the arbs and liquidity, giving money to them as the streaming swap is going along. It actually makes it more difficult to price manipulate with streaming swaps. It actually, but it does not change the whole thing about like panics and that kind of stuff, right? But if there's a panic happening, then naturally the virtual pool becomes shallower. The number of swaps you can have goes reduced, so forth and so on.
You guys really did think of everything. Thanks for the thorough answer.
Yep, no worries.
Cool. Last question. Is that based off when the streaming swap is initiated, or can that change if the volatility changes while the swap is in progress?
Good question. In terms of like the size of each trade, whatever?
Yeah. So the number of streaming swaps that can be completed for the loan open or close. Yeah,
so the number of streaming swaps that can happen it only applies at the beginning of it doesn't change during the trade. It only applies at the beginning of the trade. You see what I mean?
Got it. So if you get in a swap with 20 sub swaps and volatility increases after that point, then that's not relevant to you. Your swap goes through as normal.
Yes, but at the same time, because the virtual pool is becoming more shallow, because you started your streaming swap and over the next 5 minutes, let's just call it, it's becoming a lot more shallow. You're price exposed to that shallowness, and you're still making like trades that are good for really deep pools, but now it's become really shallow, so you're actually paying a lot more in fees, than you were at the beginning of your trade, the beginning of your streaming swap. So that all takes an effect as well.
All right, there's two more audience members with questions. Let's just let them get up and ask, and then we can wrap it up. All right, yep. Thor dude.
Hey, what's up, fellas? Okay, Chad, you said you like hard questions. I've seen a couple tweets lately that have said we are going to integrate maybe with MetaMask on September 11th. I was just seeing if that's true. And yeah, if you could clarify that, because I've been in a couple arguments lately with a couple of dudes saying that it's not true. So I was just going to see what you say. Also, if you need an intern, somebody to cook for you, travel around with you, do whatever you got to do. I'm your man. So, yeah, that's about it. That's all I got for you guys. But yeah, I'm ready to go though. You pay me about $50,000 in Rune a year, I'm good. All right, we'll see you.
How are you with watching kids? You good with kids?
Dude, I'm awesome with kids. That's what I'm doing right now. But hey, I fished before. Financial advisor, whatever you need, I can do it.
All right. Well, let me answer your question about MetaMask. Here's my knowledge and understanding that as I'm aware. The only thing I'm aware with MetaMask is I believe that the Shapeshift community is working on an app. Like, there's a way you can build an app within MetaMask, and they have a term for it. I'm blanking on it right now, but the Shapeshift community is building an app within MetaMask that will allow you to trade on THORChain within the MetaMask app. So it is coming, but it's not like built into the core trading of MetaMask itself. It's like a separate thing you have to go to and like install and like run and whatever. I would obviously much rather see, and hopefully maybe one day this will actually happen, but like be built into like the core swapping functionality of MetaMask at some point in the future.
Nice, cool. Thank you. That's awesome.
Cool. Lastly, Juggernaut. Hey.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Maybe better like this? No?
Yep, you're good.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I would ask a question. I'm sure that you put all circuit breaker for for the first MCCN launch. There was gaps to get battle testing. I just have something, I'm sorry, it's burned my head. Maybe it's a redundant question for you. Maybe you already heard that. It's something in my head for months. We are okay on the fact that more TVL include Rune price rising, allow the creation of synthetics. Okay, synthetics are many usage. Okay, let's say the worst case. Tomorrow, a brutal drop. What happens to those synths just created?
Sorry, what happens? It gets robbed? Is that what you said?
Imagine tomorrow there is a brutal drop. Okay, include of the Rune price, Bitcoin price, everything drop for any reason. What happened to all synthetic creatures by the increase of TVL and increase of Rune price?
Yeah. So if both Rune and the assets are both dropping, theoretically speaking, it matters how much. So If they drop the same amount, then basically nothing happens, and nobody has any change to their position other than just the monetary value has decreased due to market conditions. What matters to the protocol, or maybe to LPs, if Rune dives more than the asset for whatever reason, then effectively value is moved from the LPs to the savers to ensure that their synths reserve the same amount of purchasing power that they can close their synth position and get back their layer one asset, the Bitcoin or whatever it is. So that's the risk that the LPs are taking, that they are being price exposed to Rune a little bit heavier than just being price exposed to it by itself. And so if Rune's price is underperforming, LPs can't take much of a hit. They kind of have like reflexivity on their yield. Like on a bear market, they're going to have kind of lower yield, and in a bull market, they're going to have significantly higher yield, right? Just naturally, it's probably going to happen. And in an extreme case where you have a lot of synthetics and the Rune price goes down a lot, and the other assets that goes down not much at all, that can create, and in theory, could create a scenario where the pool can actually become insolvent. If the value of the synthetics is worth more than the value of the pool itself, then you can get into a pretty dangerous situation where it becomes an insolvent pool. And for the most part, that's not really likely to happen, but it certainly can happen. And if it does happen, it's most likely going to happen in the move from a bull market to a bear market, right? So if you look at the last bull to bear market, Rune went down 20x relative to the dollar. It went down 6x relative to Bitcoin. It went down 5x relative to ETH. And so there's a correlation there of like the more lower cap the asset is, the more and the more similar the cap is to Rune, the more, they go down more or less the same, right? Like it gets closer and closer. So in that scenario, where if we had the synths today of savers today, as we had it at the last start of the bear market, which we didn't at the time, we didn't have savers yet. There would have been a lot of liability on the protocol, specifically that's being placed on LPs, right? And LPs could be theoretically even zeroed in the hypothetical scenario. That's why we created the POL. The POL comes in and it provides liquidity, becomes the LP of last resort to help support the LPs and protect those LPs and ensure that the pool does not become insolvent and these kinds of things. Similarly, we just started our conversation. This is actually a decent topic to talk about here, or maybe we can save it for another time, Kyle. I'll leave it up to you. But is that we can create a backstop or a circuit breaker on the synthetics to ensure that we never get into that situation. And in the event that that does happen, where the price of Rune is really hitting hard relative to the assets for some reason, that the network can resolve itself by basically getting savers to leave, right, and get them to go and not just hold on and let the Rune price continue to dive and have more losses to the LPs and get them to actually just exit the system entirely. And there's a couple of different ways of doing that. We talked about negative interest rates, if we're over the synth cap. So the POL has been exhausted. The yield of savers is like basically zero at that point anyway, and people aren't leaving still for whatever reason. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it we talked about is forced ejections. So the network might do like a partial Ragnarok, picking probably the last in. The last in is the first out, with the exception of maybe like the last 30 days to make sure that nobody has a negative, leaves in a negative balance. But like that's something we've been talking in the community for the last week or so, a little less than a week, is like, how do we build a backstop to synthetics so that if things were to go like horribly wrong, or the Rune price would really go down, there's just it increases liability on the protocol itself or on the LPs. How do we counteract that and keep everything safe and good and whatever? And I think that circuit breaker that we've been talking about is a really strong solution to that, to the point where I'm not really terribly concerned about synths anymore. Like I've always said personally that like synthetics is probably a greater risk to the protocol, or a greater likelihood of being some sort of failure or catastrophic failure on the protocol than lending is. People are focused on lending. People are focused on algo stable Tor, and people focused on derived assets and the minting and burning, blah, blah, blah. And it's largely because of like a PTSD from Terra. But those actually systems are actually much more safe than people give it credit for. Not to say that they could never fail or it's impossible for them to fail or anything like that, but just like, to me, those things are much lower risk than synthetics. And so once we have some sort of backstop or circuit breaker on the protocol to help to ensure that we can handle that scenario well and get ourselves out of that situation just naturally, then I feel much more confident about, synthetics and how we handle the next bull to bear, which is not for another, probably 4 or 5 years or something like this. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. Makes sense. I'm sorry to ask some dumb questions sometimes, but you're all technicals, and it's not understandable by everyone. You see what I mean? That's why I ask question with words that everyone understand. Okay, I think you answer to everything in few words. That's it.
No, it's a good question to ask. Thank you for asking.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. We can, let's talk about that probably next week once the ADR is out, or I don't know if it'll be out, when is ADR will be out, but we can have a pretty in-depth discussion about the different pros and cons of doing negative interest rates versus forced ejection of savers and what the implications of all that is. So yeah, that'll be a good topic for another day, I think. And obviously not something that's like pressing, as in hey, we need a solution to this right now. But that is something that with stable savers just becomes more reliability on the network, and is going to need some kind of backstop that's protecting against passive or apathetic savers who create a liability for the dual LPs. So this is all done to protect the dual LPs, who are the ones that essentially back alt synths.
Yeah, right. It's really the savers on stables that introduce significantly more protocol risk to the protocol and to the LPs, which was what sparked this whole conversation about building a backstop to kind of ensure we can always handle any situation and handle it well.
Yeah, so POL is first line of defense, and then comes, a more drastic measure of having to kick savers out of the pool and say, re-enter later at another point.
Yeah, I would say the first line of defense is just the interest rate for savers, and so it asymptotes to zero as we get closer and closer to the synth cap. So people might leave because of the yield is not high enough. That's probably the first thing, and then if we get to a certain point, the POL, that'd be the second line of defense, the POL deploying capital. But if the POL is not able to deploy capital, either because maybe it's run out of capital, like there's a cap on how much room the POL is allowed to deploy, or maybe that's because the TVL cap is hit and there's just no more space to be deployed in the pools. That'd be another case and scenario. And so maybe that's the case, and so it can't deploy more liquidity because of that. And then if that was the case, then we rely on this kind of backstop to be like, what, let's take a little bit more of a nuclear approach to ensuring that everything is safe.
Sweet. All right. That should be about it then. Good space, guys. We'll see you next week.
Sounds good. See you guys.
Later, guys.